Amos Teller could not hear the gunshots that killed Marshal Corbin Hale, but he was standing 30 feet away, and he saw everything. The town knew him 11 years. In all that time, they handed him a shovel, a lead rope, a broken bridle to fix. Not once did they hand him a question. The morning after the killing, they crowded the jail. They swore a drifter did it. Wendell Croft, the richest man in Halloran Flats, waved Amos off the boardwalk like a fly. "A man who can't hear can't have seen anything worth a damn," he said. And 40 men in the street nodded and agreed. That night, alone by a lantern, Amos began to draw. A face, a horse's blaze, one worn boot heel. He stopped his pencil before the light showed you whose. If you believe respect is earned in silence, this story is for you. Before we go on, subscribe and stay to the end. And comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this story rides. Now let me take you back to the beginning. Amos Teller came to Halloran Flats the summer the creek ran low, and for 11 years the town learned his hands and forgot his name. He came with a saddle, a bedroll, and a canvas sack that clinked when he set it down. Nobody knew where from, nobody asked. A man who cannot answer is a man people stop questioning, and Amos had learned young to let the silence stand between him and the world like a fence. He nodded. He touched his hat brim. He watched. He watched more than any man in the county, though not a soul knew it. The livery took him on because he was cheap and he was gentle, and because old Harlan, who ran the place before, had a bad hip and a worse temper and could no longer wrestle a green colt. Amos could. That was the strange thing. A horse fresh off the range, wild-eyed, 400 pounds of fear on stilt legs, Amos would step into the corral and something in the animal went quiet. He never rushed. He never raised a hand. He would stand at the rail a long while and just look. Then he would move, slow, always where the horse could see him, and he would lay a palm flat on the neck and wait. And the colt would blow out a breath and lean its weight into him like a child leaning into sleep. Folks said it was a knack, a dumb luck of the deaf. They didn't understand that Amos, having no ears, had learned to read the whole street with his eyes. He read the twitch of an ear before a kick. He read the roll of a hoof in the dust. He read a man's temper in the set of his shoulders from 100 feet off. The horses trusted him because he never lied to them. And he never lied to them because he could see, better than most, exactly what they were. The town gave him work by pointing. That was the shape of his days. A rancher would ride up, jab a finger at a lame gelding, then at Amos, then hold up 2 fingers. 2 days. Fix it. Amos would nod. The blacksmith would slap a bent shoe on the anvil, point at the livery, and wave him off. A woman would leave a wagon in the yard and mime the turning of a wheel and tap her wrist. Hurry. They spoke to him the way you speak to a dog you trust. Not unkind, just certain, all the way down, that nothing they said would land any deeper than the doing of it. He learned their mouths. That was his secret. Over 11 years he had taught himself to read lips well enough to follow near any plain conversation, so long as the speaker faced him and the light was good. He knew the gossip of Halloran Flats better than the parson. He knew who owed money and who was drinking it. He knew which rancher beat his stock and which storekeep watered his flour. He knew all of it. And he said none of it, and the town went on believing the deaf man lived in a soft gray quiet with nothing much inside. There was one thing more, and it was the thing that mattered. Amos drew. He had a pencil stub worn to the length of a thumb and a knife to sharpen it, and whatever paper came his way, butcher's wrap, the backs of feed bills, a page torn from a mail order book. In the evenings, when the horses were fed and the last chore done, he sat on an upturned bucket outside the livery, and he drew what he had seen that day. A hawk on the ridge. The Dunmore girl's braid coming loose. the way the light fell across the false front of the mercantile at 6 o'clock. The children found him out first, the way children find everything. A boy named Tom stopped one evening, thumb in his mouth, and watched the pencil move, and what came up out of the paper was a horse, the very sorrel tied at the rail across the way, ears and all, so alive the boy laughed out loud. Amos tore the page and gave it to him. After that they came for pennies. A penny and Amos would draw your pony, your dog, your own gap-toothed face, and you would carry it home like treasure. The grown folks thought it a simpleton's pastime, a sweet, sad little trick to keep the mute man busy. Nobody looked twice at the shoebox under his cot where the finished pages went, year on year, hundreds of them now, pressed flat and kept. Nobody but Clara Mercer. Clara taught the school at the end of Fremont Street, 29 years old and unwed, which the town discussed more than it discussed the weather. She had come from back east with a trunk of books and a straight back and the private ache of a woman who felt she was meant for more than chalk dust and could not for the life of her see the door out. She noticed Amos the way you notice a well-made thing in a room full of clutter. It started with a boy in her class, deaf from a fever, whose folks despaired of him. Clara had read that there were hand signs, an alphabet you could spell into the air, and she sent away for a book and taught herself, and then she taught the boy. And one afternoon, walking home past the livery, she saw Amos mending a hackamore, and on a foolish, hopeful impulse she raised her hands and spelled. Slow and clumsy, Goodday. Amos went very still. She would remember that stillness the rest of her life, the way his whole body turned toward her hands like a plant toward a window. Then his own hands came up, weathered and scarred and quick, and he spelled it back to her, Goodday, and something in his face broke open that she had never seen there. Not joy exactly, something older and more careful than joy. The look of a man who had gone 11 years without being spoken to, hearing his name in the language of his own hands. After that they talked. Not often, and never long, because a school teacher and a livery hand had no business lingering in the eyes of Halloran Flats. But she would slow her step at the corral rail, and her fingers would move, and his would answer, and in those stolen minutes Amos Teller was not a knack or a pity or a pointed finger. He was a man with opinions. He had a dry wit that surprised her the first time it landed. He noticed things she'd have sworn no one noticed. Once he spelled out that the banker's wife was afraid of her husband, and Clara asked how on earth he knew. And Amos only touched the corner of his own eye, and a week later the whole town knew it too. He sees, Clara thought, walking home in the dusk. My God, he sees everything. She did not yet know how far that went. She did not know about the shoebox. That would come later, and it would change how she understood every day she had known him. This was the town then, in the last quiet week before the killing. A wide, dusty street between false-fronted stores, the mercantile and the bank and Dooley's saloon and the jail with its one cell. The Cattleman's Trust office with its fresh paint and its brass nameplate, Wendellcroft, Prez, the schoolhouse at the end of Fremont. The livery at the other end, where a deaf man drew horses for pennies and kept his real eyes to himself. And over all of it, thin and always present, the trouble of water. The creek ran low that summer, lower than the old-timers could recall, and low water in cattle country is a slow kind of war. The Bly parcel sat at the head of the valley, and whoever held the Bly parcel held the water rights to half the range below it, and Old Man Bly had died in the spring with no clear air, and the deed gone somewhere into the machinery of lawyers and land agents. Men waited on that deed like buzzards on a fence. First among them was Wendell Croft. Croft was 51, silver at the temples, always in a clean coat. He was president of the Cattleman's Trust, and he owned, one way or another, a piece of nearly everything. He tipped his hat to the ladies. He corrected the grammar of younger men, gently, in front of others. He had a way of setting a hand on your shoulder while he told you a thing that was not true. so that you felt churlish doubting a man so warm. He bought silence the way other men bought whiskey, easy and often, and he had never in his life been told no by anyone in Halloran Flats. He wore a silver-tipped spur, a fine one, on his right boot. And his left boot heel was worn down on the outside edge, the way a certain man's heel wears when he stands all day with his weight thrown, just so. Amos had drawn that heel a dozen times without thinking. He drew everyone's gait. It was the kind of thing his eye simply kept. Marshal Corbin Hale was the other kind of man. Hale was quiet and square-built, a marshal who did not swagger, and lately he had grown quieter still. Amos, who missed nothing, had watched the marshal grow careful over that last week, watched him ride out to the Bly parcel and come back with his jaw set. Watched him spend a long evening in the land office with the lamps burning late, and come out folding a paper into his breast pocket and looking at it once more before he buttoned his coat over it. The way a man handles a thing he knows is dangerous. Amos did not know what the paper was. He knew only that it frightened a brave man, and that a brave man frightened is a thing worth watching. It was a Thursday when it happened. The evening had gone down warm and still. Amos was in the livery late, mucking the far stall by lantern light, because a colt had colicked and he wanted to sit up with it. The big door stood open to the street to let the air move. Through it, he could see a slice of the road, the corner of the bank, the dark mouth of the alley beside it, all of it silvered by a half-moon. He saw Marshal Hale come up the street on foot. Hale walked like a man with something on his mind, head down, one hand resting on the breast of his coat where the paper was. He passed under the bank's dark front, and out of the alley beside it stepped a second figure, and Amos, who could not hear a word that passed between them, read the whole thing in bodies alone. He saw the marshal stop. He saw the marshal's shoulders come up, wary. He saw the other man's hands lift, palms out, in the gesture that says now, let's be reasonable. The gesture of a man who has bought 100 silences and expects to buy one more. He saw Hale shake his head. Once, hard, the refusal of a square man. Then, he saw the pistol. It came up from the shadow of the alley, and the muzzle flash lit the dark for half a heartbeat, a single yellow bloom of light, and in that half a heartbeat the light fell full on the shooter's face. Amos would carry that face the rest of his days. He did not hear the shot. He felt it, the way he felt all sound, a punch of pressure in the still air, a jolt through the floorboards under his knees. The colt behind him lunged against its rope. Amos was already moving, up off his knees, one hand on the stall post, staring through the open door. The marshal folded down into the dust. Slow, it seemed, though it was not slow. He went to his knees, then onto his side, one hand still pressed to his chest. The shooter stepped out to stand over him. Amos saw the boots plain in the moonlight now, the fine silver-tipped spur catching a thread of light on the right, the left heel worn on the outer edge. He saw the man crouch and reach into the marshal's coat and draw out the folded paper and tuck it away inside his own. He saw the man rise. He saw him look, once, up and down the empty street. And here is the thing that saved Amos's life and near cost him everything after. The shooter looked toward the livery, looked right at the open door and the lantern burning within, and he saw a deaf man on his knees in the muck, a simpleton, a nothing, a pair of eyes that everyone in Halloran Flats agreed were attached to no mind worth the name. The man tipped his hat, almost gentle, as if to say, "You saw nothing, because you are nothing." And he walked away up the alley and was gone. Amos stayed where he was a long moment, his heart going like a hoof drum. Then he ran to the marshal. But Corbin Hale was already gone into the dust, eyes open to the half-moon, and there was nothing in the world Amos's gentle hands could do for him. By the time the town boiled up out of its beds, drawn by the shot Amos never heard. He was kneeling over the body with the marshal's blood on his sleeves. And that, of course, is what they saw. The deaf man. The blood. They did not stop to wonder how a killer's own eyes came to be first on the scene. They pulled him back and they closed around the body, and already the talk was running. A stranger. Had to be a stranger. Decent men don't shoot marshals in the street. There'd been a drifter in town, hadn't there? A hard-looking fellow named Pike, camped down by the creek, asked at the saloon about work, and been turned away. A stranger with no people and no name to protect. The story wrote itself, the way the easy stories always do. They found Jonah Pike asleep under a cottonwood by the low creek, and they had him in the jail cell before the sun was full up. Amos tried. God knows he tried. He caught the sheriff's deputy by the sleeve and pointed to his own eyes, hard. Again and again I saw. He pointed up the street toward the alley. He made the shape of a pistol with his hand and pointed away, up the road the killer had gone, away from the creek, away from Pike. He pulled at Coates and gestured at the jail and shook his head. No, wrong man. They patted his shoulder. They peeled his fingers off their sleeves. Easy, Amos, easy now. One of them mimed the digging of a grave and pointed at the marshal's body under its blanket, giving him a job, giving him something to do with his hands so he'd stop pawing at the men who mattered. Somebody put a shovel in his grip. To the town it was kindness. Look after the poor mute. Keep him busy. It never once crossed a single mind that the man they were handing a shovel to was the only living soul who had watched Corbin Hale die. By full morning the street was crowded, and Wendell Croft stood on the boardwalk before the jail in his clean coat with his thumbs in his vest, and he ran the town the way he always ran it, softly, certainly, from just above. Terrible thing, he said. Terrible, but we have the man. Justice will be done, and done proper, when the circuit judge comes through. He had a way of making even a lynch mood sound like good order. The men nodded. Amos pushed through to the front. He planted himself before Croft, and he pointed to his eyes, and then up the alley, and he shook his head so hard his hat fell off. He mimed the gun. He mimed the tipped hat. He did everything a man can do, without a voice to name what he had seen not 8 hours before. Croft looked down at him, with something almost like pity. And he turned to the men around him, and he smiled his warm smile, and he said the words that 40 men would carry home to their wives that night, the words that Amos, reading his lips, understood down to the last letter. A man who can't hear can't have seen anything worth a damn. And they laughed. Not cruelly, most of them. That was the worst of it. They laughed the easy laugh you laugh at a child who said something sweet and foolish, and they turned back to the serious business of the men who could talk, and Amos Teller stood in the middle of the street with his hat in the dust, and nobody at all, asked him what he saw. He looked for Clara in the crowd. She was there, at the edge, her face white and stricken, and their eyes met over the heads of the townsmen. She had seen him pointing. She, alone of them all, might have come and put her hands up and given him a voice. But she was a schoolteacher, unwed, of no standing, and there were 50 men between them, and Wendell Croft was speaking, and she felt the old cold doubt close over her. Who am I, to step into the middle of the men and their law? By the time she had shamed herself for the doubt, the crowd had shifted, and the moment was gone, and Amos had picked up his hat and turned away. He did not sleep that night. He sat in the livery by the lantern, the same lantern that had burned while the marshal died, and he took out his pencil stub and his knife, and he sharpened the pencil to a fine point. And he began to draw. He did not draw in a fury. That was not his way. He drew the way he broke a horse, slow, patient, sure, letting the truth come up out of the paper in its own time. He closed his eyes, and he put himself back on his knees in the muck with the lantern behind him, and he let the half-heartbeat of muzzle flash bloom again in the dark of his mind, and he held it there, and he opened his eyes, and he drew what the light had shown him. The face came first, the line of the jaw, the set of the brow. The mouth caught in the middle of that soft, reasonable, murdering word. He drew it, and he stopped before the shading was done, before you could be sure of the man, because the night was long and there was more to set down, and he wanted every piece of it exact. He drew until the lantern guttered. Then he slid the page under the loose board beneath his cot, next to the shoebox, and he lay down in the dark and did not sleep at all. The inquest came 3 days later, and it was the loudest wrong thing Amos ever stood inside of. They held it in Dooley's, the only room big enough, tables shoved back, and every soul in Halloran Flats packed in shoulder to shoulder. Croft presided, not by any law but by the plain weight of being Croft, the leading citizen, and the county's man of business, and the fellow everyone looked to when a thing needed settling. Jonah Pike sat in irons at the front, gaunt and frightened, a stranger among people who had already decided what he was. Witnesses spoke. The deputy told how they'd found Amos over the body with blood on him, and a mutter went through the room, and Amos felt eyes cut to him, and understood with a cold drop in his stomach that some of them, in the back of their minds, half wondered about him too, and had settled on Pike only because a wandering stranger hangs easier than a town fixture. The saloon keep told how Pike had asked for work and been refused and gone off sullen. It was thin as creek water. It was enough. Amos watched Croft's mouth the whole time and read every word, and he saw how careful the man was, how he never pushed, only guided, only smoothed the room's easy anger into the shape of a lawful hanging. And once, just once, Amos saw Croft's eyes flick to him across the crowded room, and hold, half a second, cold and measuring, before they moved on. A man who tips his hat to a witness he's decided is no one. Checking that the no one is still no one. Amos rose. He came up out of his chair, and he lifted his hands and he tried, in the only language he had, to tell that packed room the truth. He pointed to his eyes. He pointed to Pike and shook his head. No, not him. He made the pistol, the flash, the tipped hat. His hands were fast and sure and desperate, and to a room that knew the signs they would have been as plain as shouting, but the room did not know the signs. The room saw the mute man waving his arms, and a ripple of unease went through it, and the nearest townsman, kindly, always kindly, reached up and took Amos by the arm and drew him back down into his seat. "Sit down now, Amos, before you hurt yourself." Somebody chuckled. Somebody said poor devils all worked up, and they turned back to Croft, and Croft inclined his head as if to say we're all a little grieved, and went on. Across the room Clara half rose too, her own hands twitching up, the signs ready in them. She could have stood and said, "I know his language. Let me speak for him." The words were right there. And the whole weight of the room was against a spinster schoolteacher making a scene. And Wendell Croft was looking her way now, mild and inquiring, and her nerve failed her a second time. She sat. She hated herself for it before her skirts had settled. But she sat. Croft bound Jonah Pike over for the circuit court. Judge Ambrose Vane was due through in 9 days, on his season's round. Pike would be tried and hanged the day after, for the town had no wish to feed a killer through a long winter, and no doubt at all how the trial would go. 9 days. Then, the rope. The gallows crew started the very next morning. Amos watched from the livery door as 2 men laid out the first timbers in the empty lot behind the jail, measuring, sawing, driving the first plank home. He could not hear the hammer. He felt each blow come up through the ground and into the soles of his feet, a slow, steady heartbeat, counting down a stranger's days. And he stood and felt it, and knew that no one in Halloran Flats was going to stop it but him. That night he drew again. He put himself back on the street. He walked the whole of it in his mind, slow, the way he walked a nervous colt around a corral, and he made himself see past the face this time, out to the edges of the memory where the other truths were hiding. And there it was. The horse. There had been a horse. He had forgotten it in the horror of the face, but his eye had kept it, the way his eye kept everything. A horse tied in the deeper shadow up the alley, waiting, the way a killer's horse waits. A paint horse. And down its face ran a white blaze, and the blaze was not straight and not clean, but forked partway down. Split in two, like a fork of lightning frozen on the animal's nose. Amos knew that blaze. He had seen it 100 times. He had drawn it. It was a horse of this town, a horse he had watered and once shod, and his hand knew the split lightning mark before his mind would let him finish the thought of whose horse it was. He drew the blaze onto the page beside the half-shaded face. Careful. Exact. And he sat with the two of them in the lantern light and felt the certainty settle into him cold and heavy as a stone going down through still water. The next night, he found the rest. He walked the memory again, and he made himself look down, at the boots standing over the fallen Marshal in the moonlight. The right boot, with its fine silver-tipped spur, catching that one thread of light. The left boot heel worn down on the outside edge, exactly so, the wear of a man who stands all day with his weight thrown just that way. Amos's hand went still over the paper. He had drawn that gait 100 times. Not on purpose. His eye simply kept the walks of men the way another man might keep their voices, and there was one man in Halloran Flats who walked on a left heel worn, just there, who wore a silver-tipped spur on his right boot, who stood on the boardwalk with his thumbs in his vest and told the town what was true. Amos did not want to draw it. He drew it anyway, because the truth in his hands was stronger than the fear in his belly. He drew the spur. He drew the worn heel. And then he had no more room in himself to pretend he did not know the face. He took up the pencil and finished the shading on the face at last, and Wendell Croft looked up at him out of the paper, mild and murdering, the reasonable words still on his mouth. Amos sat back on the bucket and put his hands over his eyes and shook, once, all through, the way a horse shudders off a fly, shuddering off the enormity of what he held. The richest man in the county, the man everyone believed. Against him, a deaf livery hand with a pencil stub and a shoebox of penny drawings, a man they had handed a shovel and told to sit down before he hurt himself. There was no court in the world, Amos thought, that would take his hand over Croft's word. But the truth did not care what the world would take. The truth only wanted out, and a stranger was going to hang for it in 8 days. Clara came to the livery 2 nights after that, with supper. She should not have. She knew it, and she came anyway, because she had not been able to look at her own face in the glass since the inquest, since the twice she had let her nerve fail, and let Amos stand alone. She brought a covered plate, and she meant only to set it down and spell "I'm sorry" and go. She had been telling herself all week that there was nothing she could have done, that a schoolteacher has no standing among men and their law, and she had almost made herself believe it. The livery door was open. The lantern was burning. Amos was not there, gone to the far stall, she thought, or the corral, and the plate was warm in her hands, and she stepped in to leave it where he'd find it. She saw the loose board. She would not have, but it sat crooked, pushed back in a hurry, a corner of paper showing pale beneath it. And Clara Mercer, who was many good things and also incurably curious, knelt and lifted the board. The shoebox came up first. She opened it because her hands opened it before her manners could stop them, and she went entirely still, kneeling there on the livery floor in the lantern light, turning over page after page after page. They were portraits. Hundreds of them. The whole town of Halloran Flats, drawn true. Here was old Harlan with his sour mouth and his kind eyes, both at once. A truth Clara had never put into words, but knew the instant she saw it. Here was the banker's wife with fear tucked in the set of her jaw, the very thing Amos had once told her, and she hadn't believed. Here were the school children, each one caught so exactly she could have named them with the faces covered. Here was the parson. The blacksmith. The Dunmore girl, with her braid coming loose here, and Clara's breath caught, was herself, drawn from some evening she'd never known she was seen, her chin lifted, her eyes looking off toward something past the edge of the page, and under her own drawn face was written, in a careful hand, the single word speaks. She understood, all at once and all the way down, what she was holding. This was not a simpleton's pastime. This was the truest record of Halloran Flats that existed anywhere on Earth. For 11 years the man they pointed at and talked over and handed shovels to had been watching them. All of them, more closely and more kindly and more exactly than any soul among them had ever watched another. He saw them. He had always seen them. He saw more truly than any man in the county, and they had spent 11 years agreeing there was nothing behind his eyes. Clara's own eyes were wet. She set the shoebox down with something close to reverence, and beneath where it had lain, she saw the other page. The newer one, set apart from the rest. She lifted it into the lantern light. A man's face looked up at her, finished, exact, mild and terrible. Beside it, a paint horse with a white blaze forked like a stroke of lightning. Below, a boot with a silver-tipped spur, and another with the heel worn down on the outer edge. All of it drawn with the same unbearable, unlying accuracy as every other page in that box. And Clara knew this face. Everyone in Halloran Flats knew this face. It tipped its hat to the ladies and corrected the grammar of younger men, and stood on the boardwalk telling the town what was true. It was not the stranger they were going to hang. The plate slipped in her hands. Warm supper spilled unheeded across the boards. Clara Mercer knelt on the floor of the livery with the drawing shaking in her grip and the lantern throwing the killer's mild eyes up at her from the page, and behind her, from the dark mouth of the doorway, she felt more than heard a footstep, and she turned, the terrible page still open in her hands, to see who had come. It was Amos. He filled the doorway with the lantern behind him, and for a moment Clara could not read his face. She was still on her knees. The drawing shook in her hands. The spilled supper cooled on the boards between them, and neither of them looked at it. He came in slow. He always moved slow, so as not to startle a horse, and he moved that way now for her. He looked at the page in her grip. He looked at the shoebox open on the floor, with its hundreds of faces spilling out into the light. Then he looked at Clara, and something in his shoulders went very still. She saw the fear cross him. She understood it at once. For 11 years this man had kept his seeing to himself. He had drawn the whole town in secret and hidden it under a loose board. And now a schoolteacher was kneeling in the middle of it with the worst page of all held open in her two hands. He did not know what she would do. He had never once known what any of them would do. Clara got to her feet. She did not hand the drawing back. She turned it around instead, so the face pointed at him, and she raised her free hand and made the shape they had made together across 2 winters of penny lessons. She spelled it slow. C-R-O-F-T. Amos went white to the lips. Then he nodded. One nod. Yes, you saw him, Clara said, and she made sure the lantern was on her mouth so he could take the words off her lips. You saw Wendell Croft shoot the Marshal. And no one asked you. No one in this whole town ever asked you. He watched her mouth. He nodded again. She looked down at the page, the mild eyes, the forked blaze on the horse, the spur with its bright tip, and below it a boot heel worn on the outer edge, worn exactly the way she had seen 100 boots worn and never once thought to look. She had walked past that man on the boardwalk every day of her life in Halloran Flats. He had corrected her grammar once, in front of the mercantile, and tipped his hat while he did it. They're going to hang a stranger for this, she said, in 9 days, and the man who did it is going to stand in the front row and watch. Amos reached out. He touched the corner of the drawing, gentle, the way he touched a colt's nose. Then he touched his own chest, over the heart, and turned his open hand toward her. She knew that one. It was not a word he had taught her. It was just a man giving a thing away. "Take it," the hand said. "It's yours now. Do what I never could." Clara Mercer stood in the livery with the killer's face in her hands and felt the whole shape of her life turn over. She had failed him twice. Once at the murder, when she said nothing. Once at the inquest, when she sat on her hands while a townsman pushed him down into his seat. She was not going to fail him a third time. "All right," she said. "All right, Amos, I'll speak." She rode home that night with the drawing wrapped flat in a schoolbook, pressed between arithmetic and a map of the territory, and she did not sleep. In the gray before dawn, she lit her own lamp and studied the page the way she studied a student's slate. She was looking for the things a judge would want. Not feelings. Proof. And the more she looked, the more the drawing gave up. The spur first. Silver tipped, drawn with a little burr of light where the tip caught the muzzle flash. She had seen that spur. Everyone who had ever stood near Croft's paint horse at the rail outside the trust office had seen that spur. He wore it on the right boot only, a vain man's flourish, and the whole street knew it. Then the heel. The left boot, worn down on the outer edge. She thought of the way Croft walked, that slight roll to the outside, the gait of a man who set his weight wrong and had done for years. Amos had drawn it. Of course Amos had drawn it. Amos had watched that walk cross the street 10,000 times and kept every step. And then, last, the hand. She had missed it the first time. It was faint, drawn at the very edge, where the killer's fingers rested on the reins. On the smallest finger there was a ring. A heavy ring, with a shape cut into its face. She held the lamp close. She knew that shape. It was the mark of the Cattlemen's Trust, the crossed brands they burned onto every deed and every gate, and Wendell Croft wore it on his hand like a king wears a crown. Face, horse, spur, heel, ring, 5 things. 5 witnesses that could not lie, and could not be talked over, and could not be sat back down in a chair. Clara wrapped the drawing again. She knew she could not take it to the town. The town was Croft's. The mayor owed him money. The banker was his cousin. The men who nodded in the street would nod again. There was only one authority in the whole of the territory that stood above Wendell Croft, and he was on the road with a wagon and a clerk, coming this way for the circuit, due in 9 days to hang a man. Judge Ambrose Vane. She would ride out and meet him on the road before he ever reached the town, before Croft could get to him first. But she could not go yet. The judge's road camp was 3 days out if the weather held, and she had a school of children and no good reason to give for leaving that would not reach Croft's ears by supper. So she waited, and it was the hardest waiting of her life, because every hour the gallows behind the jail grew another plank. She heard them at it. The whole town heard them. Hammer and saw, from first light. Men who had known Jonah Pike for all of 8 days building the thing that would kill him, whistling while they worked. The circuit judge would arrive, the court would sit, and the day after, they would walk the stranger up those fresh-cut steps. Clara counted the planks from her schoolhouse window and taught long division with her voice steady and her hands shaking under the desk. Amos kept drawing. He should not have. Clara would have told him to stop if she had known, but he did not tell her, and he could not have heard her if she'd shouted it. It was the only thing he knew how to do with the fear. He went back to the street each night after the town was abed, and he stood in the dark, where he had stood the night of the murder, and he made himself see it again and again, until the seeing was more real than the town around him. And 2 nights after that, Croft caught him at it. Amos was crouched in the alley beside the trust stable, with a scrap of paper on his knee, drawing the paint horse where it stood in its stall, the forked blaze pale in the half-moon. He did not hear the office door. He did not hear the boots on the boards. He felt the shadow fall across his page, and he looked up, and Wendell Croft was standing over him. Croft looked down at the drawing a long moment. Then, he crouched, easy, the silver spur ringing once against the ground, and he plucked the paper out of Amos's hands. He turned it to the moon. It was only the horse, only the blaze and the mane and the near foreleg. Croft studied it, and Amos studied Croft's mouth, and the words came off it slow and cold and clear. "You've got a busy little hand," Croft said, "haven't you? Drawing my horse in the dark." Amos did not move. "I heard you like to scratch pictures. Horses for the children. A penny a horse." Croft smiled without any warmth in it at all. "Harmless, a harmless man. That's what everyone says about you, you know that? A poor deaf soul who wouldn't hurt a fly and never saw a thing in his life worth telling." He tore the paper, slow, so Amos could watch it. Once, twice, into pieces, and let them fall. Then he reached into his vest and brought out a coin and pressed it into Amos's palm and closed the deaf man's fingers over it with both his hands, like a kindly uncle, like a man giving alms. "Buy yourself something," Croft said, "and stay out of my alley." He stood. The spur rang. The worn heel rolled as he turned, and he walked back to his office and shut the door, and Wendell Croft went to bed that night, certain he had frightened a simpleton off a nuisance. He never once wondered what was under the loose board in the livery. He never once thought that the real page, the finished page, the page with his own face and his own spur and his own ring on it, was already 3 miles gone, pressed flat in a schoolteacher's arithmetic book, waiting for a judge. Amos knelt in the alley and opened his hand. The coin sat there, bright in the moon. He looked at it a long time. Then he set it down on the boards, careful, in the middle of the torn pieces of his drawing, and he left it there, and he walked home. The next day, Clara left for the road camp. She told the town her mother was ailing in Sweetwater. She left the older children a week of sums on the board and Mrs. Deal to mind the little ones, and she rode out east on a borrowed mare with a schoolbook in her saddlebag, and no one thought a thing of it, because no one thought a schoolteacher's coming and going was worth a thought. She rode 2 days and part of a third. She slept one night under a wagon sheet with the drawing against her chest, and on the afternoon of the 3rd day she came over a rise and saw the judge's camp below her in a fold of the hills, a wagon, a rope corral, a thin thread of smoke, and a clerk boiling coffee. Judge Ambrose Vane heard her out standing up, with his coat off and his sleeves rolled, because a circuit judge learns to hear things standing up. He was an old man with a face like a dried creek bed and eyes that had watched a great many people lie to him. He did not lie easy himself, and he did not believe easy either. He looked at the drawing for a long time. "A deaf man drew this," he said. "Yes, Your Honor." A deaf man saw a murder by muzzle flash at 30 feet in the dark and drew the killer's face. "And his horse," Clara said. "And his spur. And his boot heel. And the ring on his hand." "Your Honor, I have taught school in that town for 6 years. I know every one of these things." That is Wendell Croft. That is the president of the Cattlemen's Trust, and he is going to sit in the front row and watch you hang a stranger for what he did. The judge was quiet. "You understand what you're asking me," he said at last. "You're asking me to throw out a bound-over case on the word of a witness who cannot speak, told to me through the hands of a woman who has a picture, against the most respected man in the county." "I'm asking you to look at him," Clara said. "In your court, with this in your hand, and then look at the drawing. That's all. Just look, the way no one in that town has ever looked at Amos Teller in 11 years. Judge Vane rolled his sleeves down. He put his coat on. "We'll ride at first light," he said, "both of us. And you'll bring your deaf man to my court, and you'll stand up next to him, and you'll say every word he tells you to say. And God help us both, Miss Mercer, if you're wrong." "I'm not wrong," Clara said. "The only wrong thing that's happened in Halloran Flats is that nobody ever asked." They reached the town the morning of the hearing. Croft had done his work in her absence. Clara learned it as she rode in, from the smell before she even saw the yard. Ash, wet ash, tramped down, the whole square of it in front of the livery still smoking at the edges. The day before, word had gone round that there was a drawing. Just talk, just a rumor off some cowhand who'd seen Amos scratching in the alley, but it was enough. Croft had gone to the mayor. The mayor had sent men. They had gone into the livery and pulled up the loose board and taken out the shoebox. The whole 11 years of it. Hundreds of faces. The truest record of Halloran Flats that had ever been made, and they had carried it out into the yard and burned it while the town watched, and called it tidying up. Amos had stood at the edge of the fire and not moved. He could not stop them, and he could not shout, and he could not explain, and so he had simply stood, mute, while 40 men warmed their hands at 11 years of his seeing. When it was Ash Croft had clapped him on the shoulder, friendly, for the crowd to see, and said something kind about keeping a clean stable, and walked away. Clara found Amos in the empty livery an hour before court. He was sitting on the edge of his cot, with his hands open on his knees, and there was ash on his sleeves, and his eyes were dry and far away. She knelt in front of him so he could see her mouth. "They didn't get it," she said. "Amos, look at me. They burned the box. But they didn't get the one that matters. I had it. It's here. It's safe." She opened the school book and showed him. Croft's face looked up at both of them from between the arithmetic pages, mild and exact, unlying, unburned. Amos looked at it, and then he looked at Clara, and for the first time in 11 years, someone watched the deaf Wrangler's face come apart, not from fear, but from something he had no sign for, and no word for, and no way to say except to press the heels of his hands against his eyes, while his shoulders shook. She let him. Then she took his wrists, gentle, the way he took a colt, and she brought his hands down, and she made sure he was watching her mouth. "Come to court," she said. "It's time somebody asked you." The courtroom was the front room of the town hall, and it was full to the walls. They had gathered to see a stranger sentenced, and the air was easy with it, the way a crowd is easy when it has already made up its mind. Jonah Pike sat at the bar in irons, gray-faced, a man 8 days from a rope and out of hope, and in the front row, in a clean coat with his hat on his knee, sat Wendell Croft, 51 years old and certain of the world, the ring heavy on his hand. Judge Ambrose Vane took the bench and let the room settle, and then did not do what the room expected. "Before this court passes to sentence," he said, "it has come to my attention that there is a witness in this matter who was never heard. That will be corrected now. This court hears everyone. That is the whole of what a court is for." A murmur went through the room. "Bring up Amos Teller," the judge said. You could feel the town not understand. Someone laughed, short, and cut it off. A man near the back said, plain enough to carry, "Judge, he's deaf. He can't tell you nothing," and Judge Vane looked at that man until he sat back down. "Then we will find a way," the judge said. "Miss Mercer, come forward. You'll speak for him." Clara walked Amos up through the crowd. She felt every eye. She set him where the light from the window fell on her face so he could read her, and she stood at his side, and she raised her hands, and the whole room stared at the schoolteacher and the deaf hand as if they were a show got up for the occasion. Wendell Croft watched from the front row with a small, patient smile, the smile of a man waiting for a foolishness to end. "Ask him what he saw," said the judge, "the night Marshal Hale was killed." Clara turned to Amos. Her hands moved. His moved back, quick, sure, and hers moved to the judge in words. "He says he was mucking the far stall. He says the street was dark. He says he saw the marshal standing under the awning of the land office, alone, holding a folded paper in his hand and reading it by a match. The room had gone quiet now. even the easy ones. He says a man came up the boardwalk behind the marshal. He says the man spoke. He says the marshal turned, and he saw the marshal's face change, and he saw the marshal reach for the paper to put it away. Clara's hands and Amos's hands, back and forth. A language the town had spent 11 years walking past. He says the man drew and fired. He says the flash lit the whole street for half a second, bright as noon. And in that half second, Clara said, and her voice did not shake now, it rang, "Amos Teller saw the killer's face, as plain as I see yours, Your Honor. And he has never forgotten a face in his life. Objection is what I'd raise," Croft said easily, from the front row, not rising, if this were a court and not a mummer's play. "Your Honor, the poor man can't have. You'll have your turn to speak, Mr. Croft," said the judge, "and you'll take it from a chair until I call you out of it. Miss Mercer, you said there is a drawing. There is. Enter it." Clara crossed to the bench and laid the page in the judge's hand, and Judge Ambrose Vane held it up to the window light and looked at it a long, long time while the room held its breath. Then he did the thing that broke Halloran Flats open. He did not read the verdict off the page. He read the room off the page. He looked from the drawing to the front row and back, slow, out loud, one thing at a time, and he made the whole town look with him. "This is a man's face," the judge said, drawn full. Older man, heavy through the jaw, a cleft in the chin, level brows. He lowered the page. He looked at Wendell Croft. "Stand up, Misty Croft, and take off your hat." "Your Honor, this is stand up." Croft stood. He was still smiling, but the smile had thinned. He took off his hat, and the town, 40 men and more who had known that face all their lives, looked at the drawing and looked at Wendell Croft standing in the window light, and a sound went through the room like wind through wheat. "Now," said the judge, and he was not hurrying. He would not hurry. "The horse. The witness draws a paint horse, white blaze on the face, forked, split, like a stroke of lightning." He looked up. "Whose paint horse is that at the rail outside this hall?" I marked it riding in. Forked blaze, plain as a signpost. "Somebody tell me whose it is." Nobody wanted to say it. Then a boy at the window, one of Clara's own students, said in a small, clear voice, "That's Mr. Croft's horse, sir. That's Duchess." "Sit down, son. You did right." The judge turned the page. The spur. The witness draws a spur on the right boot only. Silver-tipped. He leaned over the bench. "Mr. Croft, show the court your boots." Croft did not move. "A bailiff will show them for you. Or you will," the judge said. "One or the other happens in the next 10 seconds." Croft lifted his right boot, slow, and there it was, the silver tip catching the window the same way it had caught the muzzle flash, and the whole front row leaned to see and drew back. "And the left," said the judge softly. The witness drew the left heel worn down on the outer edge. "Turn it." Croft turned it. The heel was worn on the outer edge, worn to a slant, the gait of the man made plain in leather. "He has watched you walk across that street 1,000 times, the judge said, almost gentle now, to the man before him. "A man you never once looked at. And he kept every step." Then, Judge Vane held the page higher, so the last thing showed. "There is one more," he said. On the hand that holds the reins, the witness drew a ring. Small finger. A heavy ring with the crossed brands of the Cattlemen's Trust cut into the face. He looked down at Wendell Croft's right hand, where it hung at his side, where the signet sat exactly where the drawing said it would. "You needn't show that one, Mr. Croft. We can all see it from here." The silence in that room was the loudest thing Halloran Flats had ever heard, and into it, from the gallery, a man stood up. He was a stranger to most of them, a lean, weathered man with a surveyor's transit case at his feet, in town to run the water rights lines and caught by the crowd like everyone else. He stood without being called, and he pointed at the drawing in the judge's hand, and his voice was rough and certain. "Your Honor, I want it on your record who drew that. Because I know that hand. I'd know it in any court in the territory. He looked around the room at all the faces that had never once looked back at Amos. Amos Teller worked a season for my survey outfit, years back, before he came here. Drew every map we filed, best draftsman I ever hired, and it near killed me to lose him. That man doesn't guess. That man doesn't miss. If Amos Teller drew a ring on a hand, then by God there's a ring on that hand. He sat down. And the town of Halloran Flats turned, as one body, and looked at the deaf Wrangler standing in the window light, the man they had pointed at, and handed shovels to, and talked over for 11 years. And saw him, at last, for exactly what he was. Amos did not know what the surveyor had said. He could not hear it. But he read the town's faces, and reading faces was the one thing he had always been able to do, and he saw the thing move across all of them at once, from the front row to the back, and he knew. Clara was crying. She did not bother to hide it. She turned her hands to him, slow, so he could take it. They see you, her fingers said. They finally see you. Judge Vane laid the drawing flat on the bench. Wendell Croft, he said, I have on my bench the minutes of the inquest held in this town. I am going to read you something you said. When it was suggested that the livery hand might have witnessed the killing, you told this town, and it is written here, quote, a man who can't hear can't have seen anything worth a damn. 40 men are recorded as agreeing with you. He set the paper down. It appears the man who couldn't hear saw the only thing in this whole county worth a damn. Bailiff, search him. Croft moved then. He moved for the door, and the room moved to fill it. 40 men who had nodded along with him, now standing shoulder to shoulder in his way, and there was nowhere in Halloran Flats for Wendell Croft to go. They took him by the arms. He was still talking, still trying the old voice, the correcting voice, the voice that told the town what was true. Now you listen. All of you have known me. You have known me 20 years. You'll not take the word of a... And it did not work anymore, because for the first time the town was not listening to Croft. The town was looking at a drawing. The bailiff went through his coat. He brought out a folded paper from the breast pocket, worn soft at the creases, and handed it up to the bench, and Judge Vane opened it and read it, and his dried creekbed face went hard as stone. A deed, he said, to the Bly Water Rights parcel, conveying the whole of it to the Cattlemen's Trust. Signed by a man who's been dead 2 years, in ink that isn't. He looked down at Croft. This is what Marshal Hale was holding under that awning. This is what he was reading by a match when you came up the boardwalk behind him. He'd caught you, and you killed him for it, and you let a stranger sit 8 days from a rope so this paper could burn quiet at the bottom of a grave. He folded the deed. It won't. He looked at Jonah Pike, gray at the bar. Mr. Pike, this court finds no case against you, and every case against another. You are free. Strike his irons. They took the irons off the drifter's wrists in front of the whole town, and Jonah Pike stood up rubbing the marks, hardly believing it, and he walked down the middle of that silent room toward the door and the daylight. He passed the front row. He passed Wendell Croft held fast between 2 men. He stopped there, just a moment, and looked at the man who had meant to hang him, and he did not say a word. He had learned something in that jail cell about how much a silent look could carry. Then he walked out into the sun, a free man. And Amos Teller stood in the window light and watched the stranger go free, and watched the killer taken away, and did not fully understand yet all the words that had been said. But Clara stood beside him with her hand on his arm, and she turned to him, and she spelled it out slow, the whole of it, so that the last man to know would know at last. It's over, her hands said. He goes to prison. The stranger goes home. And they believe you, Amos. Every one of them. They believe you. The weeks after ran soft and slow. the way the best weeks do. The creek came up with the summer rains and ran full and loud past the livery, and the town smelled of wet green instead of ash. Jonah Pike sent a letter from 3 counties over, in a careful, uneven hand, thanking the schoolteacher and the man who drew, and Clara read it aloud to Amos with her fingers, and he kept it. Wendell Croft went east in a locked wagon to the territorial prison to await his own trial, and the paint horse, called Duchess, was sold to a rancher who was kind to her. They say Croft did not tip his hat to anyone the day they took him out. There was no one left in Halloran Flats who would have tipped one back. The gallows behind the jail came down plank by plank the same men had put it up, and the timber went to mend the schoolhouse porch, which Clara thought was about the rightest thing that lumber could have done. Amos went back to his horses. He broke them gentle, the way he always had, and never startled a colt, and read the whole street by its dust the way he always had. But it was not the same street. Because now, when a man passed him on the boardwalk, the man said his name, Morning, Amos, facing him. In good light, so he could take it off their lips. A small thing. The smallest thing in the world, a name, said out loud to a man's face. It had only taken 11 years and a murder and a drawing to teach the town to do it. One evening near sundown, Clara came out to the livery, and she found Amos in the corral with a young colt he had gentled that spring. And the colt was nosing at his shoulder, unafraid, the way animals had always trusted him before people ever learned to. The low gold light lay over both of them. She stood at the rail and watched a while before he felt her there and turned. She had something under her arm. She held it up so he could see. It was a box. Not the old shoebox. That was ash, a new one, a good wooden one with a proper lid, and inside it a single sheet of paper, the sheet, the drawing that had turned the town over, flattened and clean and kept. She had put it on the shelf in her schoolhouse, she showed him. Where the children could see. Where anyone who came in could see. Not hidden under a board anymore. Set up high, in the light, admired, Amos looked at it a long moment. Then he looked at Clara, and he did the thing he had done that first night in the livery. He touched his own chest, over the heart, and turned his open hand toward her. But this time it did not mean take it away. This time, the way she read it, standing there in the gold light with the creek running full behind them, it meant something nearer to thank you, and something nearer to stay. She climbed through the rail and stood beside him, and the colt did not shy from her, because Amos was there, and everything near Amos had always known it was safe. The 3 of them stood in the last of the sun and did not need to say anything at all, which suited the 2 of them who couldn't hear it, and the one who had never once minded the quiet. The town had spent 11 years certain there was nothing behind the deaf man's eyes. There was more behind them than behind any pair of eyes in the county. There always had been. It just took the rest of them a while, and a terrible thing, to learn how to look. Some men shout to be believed, some men buy it, and correct you, and tip a hat over the lie, and some men see clearest in the quiet, and set it down true, and wait, patient as a gentled horse, for the world to finally turn and ask. If you've ever been the quiet one in a loud room, the one they talked over, the one nobody thought to ask, then you already know what Amos knew. Comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this story rides.